the insurance company mailed me a change notice for my wife's car. The new garaging address was a luxury loft 40 minutes away, an apartment my brother had moved into and my parents had guaranteed before Sarah ever asked me for a separation. I did not know the last part yet. I only knew Sarah had sworn she was sleeping in her friend Becca's spare room. This is an original story created for confession mode. The notice arrived on an ordinary Wednesday in October. I teach American history at a public high school, so by the time I got home I had already explained the Missouri Compromise 3 times, broken up an argument over a borrowed charger, and answered an email from a parent who thought a grade of 89 was a personal attack. I brought the mail inside, let our dog Milo into the yard, and opened envelopes while leftover soup heated on the stove. Most of it was junk. The insurance letter looked routine enough that I almost put it straight into the recycling. Sarah's SUV was still on our joint policy because we had not made any legal decisions during what she called our trial separation. The company was confirming a change to the address where the vehicle was normally kept. The address was the Mercantile Lofts, Unit 402. Our ranch house was in Bellwood. Becca lived in a narrow apartment over a bakery on Harrison Avenue. The Mercantile was a converted textile warehouse in the city, with exposed brick, a rooftop deck, and rents that were higher than my monthly mortgage payment. Sarah had never mentioned it. I read the line again, then checked the policy number. It was ours. The vehicle identification number matched the SUV parked beside my car for the first 6 years of our marriage. Sarah and I had been together for 9 years and married for 7. We did not have children. We had planned to start trying that winter, which made the separation feel both sudden and strangely scheduled, as if somebody had pulled a fire alarm during the last quiet minute before an exam. 6 months earlier, Sarah had come home on a Tuesday and kept her coat on while she sat across from me in the living room. She worked freelance, mostly photographing products and interiors for small companies. Her schedule rose and fell with contracts. That spring had been slow, and I thought she was worried about money. Instead, she said, "I cannot breathe in this house anymore." I asked whether she meant the house or the marriage. "I don't know," she said. "That is why I need space." She did not want counseling yet. She did not want lawyers. She wanted a trial separation with no deadline and no rules beyond telling each other before dating anyone else. She said Becca had offered her a spare room while she figured out who she was without being part of a couple. The request hurt, but it did not sound impossible. We had been polite and distant for months. I stayed late at school during testing season. Sarah took weekend shoots. Our conversations had narrowed to groceries, Milo, and whether the dishwasher was making a new noise. I knew we had a problem. I did not know she had already chosen its solution. I asked if there was someone else. "No," she said immediately. "This is not about another man. I need you to believe that." That sentence came back to me when I saw the insurance notice. My younger brother Caleb appeared at our house the afternoon Sarah moved out. He said Mom had told him we were having a rough week and he wanted to help. Caleb had recently left a sales job and described himself as an independent consultant. Sometimes he traveled. More often, he talked about contracts that were about to close. He carried Sarah's larger suitcase to the SUV. Then he put his hand on my shoulder and said, "You're doing this right, David. Most guys would make it ugly. You're giving her room to come back." I thanked him. I can still see that moment clearly. Sarah checking the trunk, Caleb beside me, both of them waiting for me to accept my role as the reasonable one. I kissed Sarah on the forehead. Caleb watched her drive away. 10 minutes later, he said he was leaving the state for a consulting project and might be gone for several weeks. For the first month, Sarah texted every evening. She asked about Milo and the house. She said Becca's apartment was cramped but peaceful. When I offered to bring her mail or meet for coffee near Harrison Avenue, she said contact made it harder to think. I respected the distance because she had framed respect as the test I needed to pass. My parents reinforced it. Robert and Linda lived 20 minutes away in the 2-story house where Caleb and I grew up. My mother had always liked Sarah. During the separation, liking turned into a kind of protective alliance. If I said I was confused, Mom reminded me Sarah was sensitive. If I asked how long I was supposed to wait, Dad told me patience was the difference between a husband and a jailer. One Sunday, I said, "I have called her twice in 3 weeks." Mom lowered her coffee and replied, "Then don't make the third call the one that pushes her away." The word controlling started appearing around that time. I was controlling if I asked where the separation was heading. I was controlling if I wanted a date for counseling. I was controlling if I said it felt odd that Sarah would not let me bring her mail to the place where she claimed to live. Caleb was supposedly moving between client sites, so I rarely saw him. Dad said Caleb was finally building something of his own and needed encouragement, not questions. At family dinners, there were 2 empty chairs and 4 people explaining why I should not wonder about either one. The insurance notice was the first fact that did not care whether my questions made anyone uncomfortable. I took a photograph of it, scanned it at school the next morning, and stored the copy with my personal records. I did not log into Sarah's email or track her phone. I did not have access to the mercantile building, and I did not pretend that an address change proved an affair. It proved only that Sarah's car was regularly kept somewhere she had not disclosed. After the last bell, I called the insurance company from my classroom. The representative would not discuss who entered the change, but she confirmed it had been requested through the policy account and that confirmation had been mailed to the named policyholders. I asked her not to alter anything. I wanted the record left exactly as it was. Then I looked up the building's public website. Unit 402 had 2 bedrooms. The monthly rent started at $3,000, not including parking. Sarah's recent freelance income could not cover that on its own. Becca was still posting photographs from the bakery apartment she had lived in for years. I spent Thursday trying to teach while my brain built explanations. Maybe Sarah had taken a house-sitting job. Maybe a client had provided temporary housing. Maybe she had entered the wrong address while updating something else. Each possibility worked until I added her refusal to let me visit. On Friday, I drove to the mercantile after school. I parked on a public street across from the main entrance. I could see the vehicle gate without blocking traffic. I wrote the time in a notebook, then felt ashamed of myself for writing it. History teachers spend a lot of time explaining how records outlive the people who make them. That afternoon, documentation felt less like scholarship and more like admitting my marriage had become a disputed event. Sarah's SUV entered the garage at 6:38. She was alone. Caleb's truck arrived 11 minutes later. The truck had a distinctive white scrape above the rear wheel from the time he backed into Dad's mailbox. There was no question it was his. There was also no client site in another state. My brother was 40 minutes from my house, entering the same private garage as my wife. I stayed where I was. Their vehicles proved they were in the same building, but not what they were doing. I told myself I would wait 30 minutes, leave, and speak to an attorney before speaking to either of them. 45 minutes later, Sarah and Caleb walked out through the front entrance. Sarah wore the dark green dress I had given her on our last anniversary. Caleb held the door, placed his hand at the small of her back, and guided her toward the curb. They stopped under the building's metal awning while Caleb checked his phone. Sarah reached up and straightened his collar. He kissed her. She put both arms around his neck and kissed him back. I watched long enough to know I had not misunderstood. Then I lowered my eyes. I did not take a photograph. I did not cross the street. I wrote the time beside the 2 vehicle entries and drove away before their ride arrived. The title of the problem changed during that drive. I was no longer waiting for Sarah to decide whether she wanted our marriage. My wife was living with my brother while both of them used separation language to keep me quiet. The unanswered question was how much of my family already knew. I got home at 9:12. Milo met me at the door with a tennis ball. I sat on the kitchen floor and held him until he stopped trying to play. At 9:20, Sarah texted, "Long day with Becca. Going to bed early." At 9:27, Mom texted, "Proud of you for giving Sarah what she needs." Those messages were 7 minutes apart. I could not prove Mom knew where Sarah was at that moment, but the timing made me stop treating my parents as neutral. I spent the weekend doing only things I could explain without embarrassment later. I downloaded statements from accounts that were already mine. I changed the password on my personal email, not our shared utilities. I listed the property we owned together. I saved the insurance notice and Sarah's messages. I wrote exactly what I had observed outside the mercantile, including the fact that I had taken no photograph. On Monday morning, I met a family law attorney named Brenda Shaw. She had been recommended by another teacher who had gone through a long divorce. Brenda listened without reacting to the dramatic parts. She cared about dates, ownership, income, and whether Sarah had taken money from shared accounts. When I finished, Brenda said, "The affair may matter emotionally more than it matters to property law here. Do not make legal plans based on punishment. Your useful facts are that you were separated, she has undisclosed housing, and you need to protect your records without moving money or locking her out." It was not the speech I wanted. It was the advice I needed. Sarah had withdrawn $4,000 from our joint savings when she left. I had agreed in writing that she could use it for temporary expenses. There were no other unusual withdrawals. I could not see her private account, and I had no right to guess what it contained. Brenda told me any relevant financial support could be addressed through formal disclosures if I filed. "I want to file," I said. She asked whether I wanted a day to decide. I had 6 months to decide. I just didn't know that was what I was doing. We prepared the petition that week. Brenda warned me that filing would begin a process, not finish one. The house could not simply be sold because I wanted out. Sarah was on the deed and mortgage. We would need an agreement or a court order. Until then, late payments would damage both of us, so somebody had to keep the mortgage current. That somebody was me. Sarah was served at the mercantile the following Tuesday. She called 6 times before sending a message. "You followed me." I answered once. The insurance company mailed our joint policy change to our home. "Please communicate about the divorce through email or counsel." Her reply came immediately. "Caleb only moved in because he had nowhere else to go. This is not what you think." I looked at the message for several minutes. She had not asked what I thought. She had not denied living there. Most importantly, she had placed Caleb in the loft without knowing I had watched them kiss. That evening, my father called. "You had your wife served at her home?" he asked. It was the first time anyone in my family had called the mercantile her home. I thought her home was Becca's spare room. Dad paused. Then his voice hardened. Sarah needed stability. We helped her. That is what family does. Does family also tell me she is living with Becca? You were not ready for the whole conversation. Was Caleb part of the help? Dad said my brother's name as if I had insulted him. Caleb has his own situation. I asked whether Dad had paid for the loft. He did not answer. He told me lawyers would turn a painful transition into a war. He said if I withdrew the filing, all 5 of us could sit down and find a compassionate way forward. All 5? I asked. He ended the call. Sarah hired counsel and filed her response. She described the date of separation accurately and asked for a temporary arrangement covering the mortgage, insurance, and access to the house. There was nothing outrageous in the filing. That was almost harder than a theatrical attack would have been. On paper, we were 2 adults dividing a life. The conspiracy, I felt, was not a legal category. For the next 3 months, I paid the mortgage, utilities, homeowner's insurance, and most of Milo's expenses. Sarah paid her car loan and personal bills. My attorney requested that final credits and reimbursements be addressed in settlement, but she did not promise I would recover every dollar. I stopped buying lunch at school. I postponed replacing my failing laptop. Every time the furnace started, I listened for a repair I could not afford. Meanwhile, Sarah lived in a building with a rooftop deck. I did not know who paid that rent. Not yet. Formal financial disclosure began in November. Sarah listed her freelance income, the $4,000 she had taken with my consent, and recurring housing support from my parents. She described the support as voluntary monthly gifts. Because she was claiming limited income while asking that I continue carrying the marital home, Brenda requested records showing the amount and duration of that support. Sarah's attorney objected to broad access to my parents' finances. Brenda narrowed the request. We did not need their complete bank history. We asked for documents concerning the mercantile lease, security deposit, guarantee, and rent paid on Sarah's behalf. The building management company did not simply hand us a folder. Its lawyer required a subpoena. Sarah's side argued that the identity of another occupant was irrelevant to dividing our property. Brenda argued that the lease date and third-party support were relevant to Sarah's financial disclosures and her account of when the separation began. The disagreement took weeks. During those weeks, Sarah tried to create a family conversation outside the legal process. She emailed that she and Caleb had developed feelings only after she moved out. She said my parents had funded the apartment because Becca's place was unsuitable for a long stay. According to Sarah, Caleb arrived later after losing a contract. Their relationship had grown from two lonely people sharing an address. It was a careful story. It explained the affair without admitting a plan. It also turned my parents into generous bystanders rather than participants. Caleb sent his own version through a new number after I blocked the first one. I never meant for this to happen. I was helping her because you weren't. I did not answer. I forwarded the message to Brenda and kept teaching. December was the first month I understood the practical cost of refusing their version. The mortgage cleared 2 days before payday. My legal retainer needed replenishing. Sarah requested access to collect furniture she said belonged to her, and the two of us disagreed over a dining table her parents had given us as a wedding gift. None of it was glamorous enough for a betrayal story. It was inventory sheets, receipts, and deciding whether a lamp was worth another email billed in 6-minute increments. My parents mailed me a birthday card with no return address. Inside, Dad had written, "We can still fix this if you stop treating family like opposing counsel." There was no check. There was no apology. There was also no mention of Caleb. I put the card in the file with the insurance notice. In January, the mercantile produced the lease packet under the narrow request. Brenda did not send it to my house like a surprise gift. She called me to her office, placed the pages on a conference table, and walked me through what they established and what they did not. Sarah was the primary tenant for Unit 402. Caleb was listed as an authorized adult occupant on the original application, not added later. My father, Robert, had signed the guarantee. The lease had been executed 6 weeks before Sarah sat on our sofa and asked for a trial separation. The move-in date was 2 days after she left our house. Attached payment records showed that the security deposit and first month's rent came from my parents' joint checking account. Later ledger entries showed the same account paying the landlord directly each month. We did not have their entire bank statement, and I did not need it. The landlord's ledger identified the payer and the amount. The documents did not prove when the physical affair began. They proved the four of them had arranged for Sarah and Caleb to occupy the same apartment before Sarah told me she was moving in with Becca. They proved my parents had guaranteed and funded that arrangement while telling me to be patient. Brenda pointed to an email included with the rental application. My father had written to the leasing agent, "My son Caleb and our daughter-in-law Sarah will occupy the unit. My wife and I will cover the rent for the initial term while they get established." Our daughter-in-law. Not our separated daughter-in-law. Not Sarah alone, while they get established. I asked Brenda to read the date aloud even though I could see it. March 3rd, Sarah asked for the separation on April 14th. For 6 weeks, my wife, brother, and parents had a signed plan for the life Sarah claimed she needed space to discover. On the day Caleb carried her suitcase, he already knew which bedroom he was taking. I had believed the kiss outside the mercantile was the worst image I would carry. It was not. The worst image was Caleb's hand on my shoulder beside Sarah's open trunk, praising me for making their move easy. That afternoon, Sarah's attorney proposed mediation. Her position changed in subtle ways. She no longer said Caleb moved in later. She said he was listed from the start for administrative convenience because his income helped the application, even though my father had guaranteed it. She said my parents believed she and Caleb would use separate bedrooms. She said the romantic relationship began after the move. All three explanations could not make the original lie disappear. If the plan was innocent, There had been no reason to invent Becca. At mediation in February, Sarah and I sat in separate rooms. The mediator carried proposals between us. We discussed the house, retirement accounts, vehicles, personal property, and the months I had paid the full mortgage. The process did not decide who was morally right. It tried to produce terms we could both sign. Sarah wanted time before listing the house because she said a spring market would bring a better price. I wanted it listed immediately because every extra month drained my checking account. We compromised on an early March listing date and a formula for shared costs from that point forward. She also asked to keep several pieces of furniture stored at the ranch house while she decided where she and Caleb would live next. I said no. She could identify what she claimed under the property list and remove it on a scheduled date. I would not maintain a free storage unit for the apartment my parents were already funding. That was the first moment during the legal process when my decision felt visible. Filing had been a document. Saying no to indefinite access changed the shape of my daily life. Sarah could no longer keep one foot in our house while building another home with my brother. After mediation, my mother asked to meet. She said Dad, Caleb, and Sarah would be present and that the family needed one conversation without attorneys translating every sentence. Brenda advised me not to negotiate property or sign anything. She did not tell me I was forbidden to speak to my parents. I agreed to go because I wanted to hear them explain the lease while looking at its date. The meeting was on a Sunday afternoon in the living room where Caleb and I used to build forts from couch cushions. Mom and Dad sat in their usual chairs. Sarah and Caleb shared the love seat. They were not touching, but they had positioned themselves as a pair. I stayed near the doorway. Dad began with the sentence he used whenever he wanted obedience to sound like reason. Let's lower the temperature. I placed copies of the lease application and his email on the coffee table. The temperature is fine, I said. Explain March 3rd. Mom looked at Sarah. Sarah looked at Caleb. Dad looked at me. He said they had known Sarah was unhappy. Caleb had confided that his consulting work was unstable. My parents believed sharing an apartment would give both of them a fresh start without either person living alone. They planned to tell me after Sarah moved. She told me she was moving in with Becca. Because you would have objected, Mom said. I would have objected to my wife secretly moving into an apartment with my brother. Listen to yourself, she replied. You make everything sound dirty. I asked Sarah when the relationship became physical. She said the date did not matter because our marriage had already been emotionally over. It mattered when you looked me in the face and said there was nobody else. Caleb leaned forward. She was scared of you. I had heard that word approaching for months. Scared was stronger than controlling and harder to challenge without sounding exactly like the man they wanted me to be. What did I do that frightened her? I asked. Caleb said my calmness made people feel judged. Mom said I could punish or room without raising my voice. Dad said Sarah feared I would use money and the house to trap her. I reminded them that she had taken $4,000 with my written consent, kept her car, hired counsel, and lived in a home they paid for. I had not threatened her, entered the loft, or stopped her from collecting property. Sarah said, "You are doing it right now. You're presenting a case instead of having a feeling. You built a case before I knew there was a trial." Nobody answered. I asked Dad how long he intended to pay their rent. He said that was between him and Mom. Then why was keeping it secret between all of you? Dad stood. Because every conversation with you becomes an audit. We chose compassion. You chose litigation. He told me they were revising their estate plan. Whatever I might once have inherited would go to Caleb, partly because legal expenses and rent had reduced what they could leave, and partly because Caleb would need support more than I did. For a second, the old family reflex reached for me. Caleb needed more, so David should expect less. Caleb broke something, so David should understand. Caleb took the risk, so David should absorb the cost. Then I remembered the lease date. It is your money, I said. Leave it to Caleb. Spend it all. I am not trading my silence for the possibility of an inheritance. Mom started crying. She asked whether I was really willing to lose my entire family over one relationship that had changed. I didn't arrange this meeting, I said. I found it. I told them the divorce would continue. I told Sarah future property communication would go through the agreed process. Then I told my parents and Caleb not to contact me unless there was a genuine emergency involving health or safety. I did not announce what Christmases they would miss or make promises about funerals. I gave them a boundary I could keep that day. Caleb followed me to the front walk. "You're going to regret making this permanent," he said. I turned around. "You signed a lease with my wife before she left me." Permanent started there. I got in my car and drove home. The house went on the market in March, almost 11 months after Sarah moved out. Before the photographer arrived, I removed our wedding pictures and packed the guest room where she had stored the last of her work equipment. Milo followed me from room to room, unsettled by the boxes. The first offer fell through after an inspection found moisture near the back foundation. We paid for a drainage repair from a joint escrow account established under our temporary agreement. The second buyers asked for a credit toward the roof. Each delay meant another mortgage payment. By then, my attorney fees were a little over $18,000. I had paid 7 months of the full carrying costs before the temporary agreement shifted part of them to Sarah's side of the final accounting. I did not recover every dollar. The settlement was not designed to make betrayal cheap. It was designed to end the financial connection without gambling more money on a trial. Sarah kept her SUV and her freelance business equipment. I kept my pension intact, my car, Milo, and the furniture assigned to me. We split the net proceeds from the house after the mortgage, repairs, and sale costs. Neither of us received ongoing support. Those terms came from negotiation, not from a judge declaring anyone a winner. We signed the final agreement in June. The divorce was entered in August, 10 months after the insurance notice arrived. I saw Sarah once at the title office when we signed the house sale documents. She wore a plain gray sweater and looked tired. Caleb was not with her. I did not ask where he was or whether my parents still paid the rent. Their arrangement was no longer information I needed to make a decision. Before leaving, Sarah said, "I wish you could understand that it wasn't planned the way you think." I looked at the signature line she had just completed. "The lease was signed 6 weeks before you left. I mean the feelings. The lie was planned." She looked down. That was the closest we came to agreement. The house sold on a Thursday. After closing, I drove there for the last time to collect the keys from the lockbox and check the rooms. The buyers had asked us to leave the refrigerator. Everything else was gone. In the living room, 4 pale rectangles marked the wall where our photographs had hung. I stood there for less than a minute. Then Milo scratched at the back door, ready to leave. My new apartment is smaller than the Mercantile and nowhere near as impressive. It is on the 2nd floor of an older building close enough to school that I can walk when the weather is good. The balcony faces a soccer field. On Saturday mornings, Milo watches children chase a ball while I grade essays at a folding table. I used part of my share from the house to pay the remaining legal bill. I put the rest into savings. There was no dramatic financial victory. I ended a 7-year marriage with less money, no house, and no relationship with the people in most of my childhood photographs. There was also no rent payment large enough to buy my cooperation. Mom sent one email after the divorce. She said she hoped time would help me see that everyone had acted out of love. I read it once and placed it in a folder without answering. Dad mailed a holiday card. Caleb tried a new social media account. Sarah sent nothing. No contact did not feel powerful at first. It felt quiet and inconvenient. I changed my emergency contact at work. I gave a trusted colleague the spare key to my apartment. On Thanksgiving, I ate with another teacher's family and answered questions about whether I preferred white meat or dark instead of questions about why I could not forgive my brother. The ordinary parts helped more than any speech could have. This year, when the auto insurance renewal arrived, it listed 1 driver, 1 car, and 1 address. I checked the page because I check every page now. Then I filed it and took Milo outside. I still do not know whether Sarah and Caleb believe they would build a lasting life in Unit 402. I do not know whether my parents still fund it. I know what the records established. The apartment was arranged before the separation, my brother was named from the start, and my parents paid to make the deception possible. That knowledge did not give me my family back. It gave me a clean decision. The ranch house is gone. The marriage is over. The 4 people who asked me to call their plan compassion no longer get to define what patience means in my life. If your parents had funded the apartment where your spouse lived with your sibling, would the affair end only the marriage, or would it end the family too?